The desk is cheap laminate, scarred with old pen marks and a faint ring from someone else's coffee. A nameplate sits crooked at the edge, not yet straightened. Danielle Carter stands behind it anyway, hands folded, shoulders square, waiting. The lobby smells like disinfectant and wet coats. Outside, sirens wail and fade, over and over, like a warning no one listens to. The officer doesn't look at her at first. He scans the room as if she's furniture, useful, silent, temporary. His boots stop inches from the desk. He sighs, sharp and theatrical. "You don't work here," he says, finally lifting his eyes. Danielle feels a familiar tightening in her chest. The pause before her reply stretches too long, heavy with memory. She thinks of every time she's been asked to prove she belongs. Every time her credentials were invisible until someone else spoke them aloud. "I'm here for the board meeting," she says evenly. The officer laughs under his breath, a low, private sound meant to put her back in place. "Then you're in the wrong building," he replies. His hand rests casually near his radio, ownership disguised as procedure. People pass behind him. Clerks, aides, interns, heads down, steps quickening. No one intervenes. The silence presses in, louder than shouting. Danielle slides her badge forward, just enough to be seen. He doesn't read it. He waves it away like a receipt. "Step aside," he says. "Don't make this difficult." The word difficult lands like a threat dressed as advice. Then the elevator dings behind him. Doors open. Voices spill out. And someone says her name. Danielle Carter arrived early on purpose. The Civic Oversight building was quieter than it would be in an hour, the marble floors still holding the night's cold. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Not fully awake yet. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder and scanned the lobby, mapping exits out of habit. Old instincts never retired. She approached the reception desk, set her folder down, and took a breath. Before she could speak, Boots stopped in front of her. "You lost?" the officer asked. Danielle looked up slowly. He was white, mid-40s, clean uniform, posture loose with confidence. His badge caught the light when he shifted. She noticed how his hand hovered near his belt, not threatening, just claiming space. "No," she said. "I'm here for the board meeting." He tilted his head, eyes flicking over her clothes, her hair, the plain leather bag at her side. The assessment was quick and practiced. "Staff entrance is around back," he replied. "I'm not staff." That earned her a sigh. He leaned one elbow on the desk, crowding her without touching. "Ma'am, I don't have time for this. If you're waiting on someone, you can do it outside." Danielle felt the familiar heat rise behind her eyes. She kept her voice steady. "I'm not waiting. I'm checking in." "Checking in for what?" "For the Municipal Accountability Board." He laughed quietly, shaking his head. "Yeah, okay." A clerk passed behind him, eyes down. Another officer stood near the doors, watching but not moving. Danielle reached into her bag and slid her badge onto the counter. "I'm Danielle Carter," she said. "Interim chair." The officer didn't pick it up. He glanced at it, then pushed it back with one finger. Badges don't mean much these days. She stared at him. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." His tone sharpened. "I need you to step aside." "This is inappropriate," she said. Now his hand did settle on his radio. "You're getting hostile." Danielle almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Instead, she exhaled. "Asking to be treated with respect is not hostility." He straightened, irritation flashing across his face. Last warning. The word hung between them. Warning of what? Removal? Arrest? Humiliation made official? Behind him, the elevator chimed. The doors slid open. Voices filled the lobby, familiar, purposeful. "Danielle!" A man called. The officer stiffened. He turned just as two board members stepped out, folders in hand. "There you are," one of them said, relief clear in her voice. "We were worried you'd gotten stuck in traffic." The officer looked from them to Danielle, then back again. "You know her?" he asked. The woman blinked. "Of course we do. She's the chair." Silence snapped tight. The officer's face drained a color as understanding landed. slow and heavy. Danielle met his eyes. She said nothing, and for the first time since she'd walked in, the room belonged to her. The officer cleared his throat. I didn't realize, he said, already reaching for the badge he'd pushed away. His voice had softened, smooth at the edges, as if someone had turned down the volume on his authority. There must have been a mix-up. Danielle didn't move to reclaim it. She watched him the way she'd learned to watch men like him. Still, attentive, cataloging the shift. A mix-up, she asked. One of the board members, Eleanor Price, frowned. What exactly is happening here? The officer straightened, shoulders back. Nothing serious. Just a routine security check that got miscommunicated. Danielle felt a familiar twist in her stomach. The rewrite had begun. Is that what you call it? She said, when you tell someone they don't belong before asking who they are? The officer's jaw tightened. Ma'am, with all due respect. Stop. Eleanor cut in. You've had enough time to speak. Another board member, Marcus Hill, glanced around the lobby. Why is everyone staring? Because this is how it always looks, Danielle thought. Quiet until it isn't. She picked up her badge and clipped it back onto her blazer. The small click sounded louder than it should have. I arrived early, she said, turned to Eleanor and Marcus. I was checking in when officer, she paused, looking at him. I didn't catch your name. Reynolds, he said quickly. Officer Tom Reynolds. When Officer Reynolds decided I was in the wrong place, Danielle continued, and escalated without cause. That's not fair, Reynolds said, a defensive edge creeping back in. I was following protocol. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Protocol says you ignore credentials? Reynolds looked at him, then at the floor. I didn't ignore them. You pushed them back, Danielle said, with one finger. The detail landed. Eleanor inhaled sharply. That's unacceptable, Eleanor said. Do you have a supervisor on site? Reynolds hesitated. Just a beat too long. I can call one. Please do, Danielle said. Her voice was calm, but her hands had curled into fists at her sides. As Reynolds stepped away, Marcus leaned closer. Are you okay? Danielle nodded automatically. Then she stopped herself. I'm here. That was the truest answer she had. They moved toward the conference wing together. The lobby buzzed behind them, whispers blooming where silence had been planted minutes earlier. Inside the hallway, the lights were warmer. The air smelled like coffee and printer toner. Danielle exhaled, but the tension didn't leave her body. Eleanor touched her arm. I'm sorry. You shouldn't have had to deal with that. Danielle gave a small smile. I've dealt with worse. I know, Eleanor said softly. That doesn't make it okay. They reached the conference room. Through the glass walls, Danielle saw staffers setting up microphones, arranging folders, avoiding eye contact. Word had already traveled. Marcus closed the door behind them. This won't be swept away, he said. Not today. Danielle met his gaze. It will try. A memory rose uninvited. Her first courtroom, years ago. A judge who mistaken her for an intern. The way she'd learned to keep receipts, not emotions. This building, she said quietly, exists because people were told their experiences didn't count unless they came with proof. I'm not starting my term by pretending this didn't happen. Eleanor nodded. Good. There was a knock at the door. Reynolds stood outside with a man in a suit, Captain Lewis, judging by the insignia. His smile was practiced. Chair Carter, Captain Lewis said, extending his hand. I apologize for the inconvenience. Danielle didn't shake it. What exactly are you apologizing for? She asked. The captain blinked. A misunderstanding at the front desk. There it is, Danielle said. Lewis cleared his throat. Officer Reynolds believed. Believe what? She asked. Lewis glanced at Reynolds, then back at her, that you were staff. And why would that be a problem? Marcus asked. Lewis forced a chuckle. No problem at all. Just security protocols. Danielle leaned forward slightly. Captain, I've spent 20 years litigating cases where protocol was a shield people are behind when bias did the work for them. If you're here to apologize, do it honestly. The room went quiet. Lewis straightened. Officer Reynolds made an error in judgment. Danielle nodded. Now we're getting closer. And we'll address it internally, he added quickly. Not without documentation, she said. And not without transparency. Reynolds shifted. I didn't mean any disrespect. Danielle finally looked at him again. Impact doesn't require intent. His mouth opened, closed. Eleanor checked her watch. The meeting starts in 5 minutes. Danielle stood. Then let's begin, she said. But understand this. What happened in that lobby is exactly why this board exists. She walked past him toward the conference table. Spine straight, pulse loud in her ears. Behind her, the door clicked shut, and the reckoning, long delayed, officially began. The room settled into an uneasy quiet as people took their seats. Danielle sat at the head of the table, hands folded over her notes, eyes forward. The long oak surface reflected the overhead lights, polished to the point of sterility. Microphones blinked red. A camera crew adjusted angles along the far wall. Local public access. Standard procedure. Nothing about this meeting was supposed to be dramatic. And yet, Captain Lewis remained standing near the door with Officer Reynolds beside him. Stiff now, stripped of the casual confidence he'd worn in the lobby. Reynolds kept his gaze fixed somewhere just above Danielle's shoulder, as if eye contact itself had become dangerous. Eleanor cleared her throat. This session of the Municipal Accountability Board is now in order. Danielle nodded. Thank you. Her voice carried. Calm, measured, the same voice she used in court when judges expected emotion and got precision instead. Before we proceed with the agenda, she continued, there's an incident that occurred in this building less than 30 minutes ago that must be addressed. A murmur rippled around the table. Danielle didn't look at Reynolds when she spoke. She looked at the members, at the staff, at the camera. I was detained at the front desk, she said, verbally challenged, dismissed. My credentials were physically pushed away. This occurred before any attempt was made to verify my identity. Reynolds shifted. Lewis's jaw tightened. Danielle continued, I'm naming this now because these moments are often minimized, labeled misunderstandings, buried under language meant to soothe rather than correct. Lewis stepped forward. Chair Carter, with respect, we've already apologized. No, Danielle said, her tone firm but even. You offered an apology without accountability. That's not the same thing. Reynolds swallowed. I didn't know who you were. Danielle finally turned to him. That's the point. The room stilled. You didn't know who I was, she said again, and you decided that meant I didn't belong. Reynolds opened his mouth. I treat everyone the same. Marcus leaned forward. Then why didn't you ask her name first? Silence. Eleanor added quietly. Why didn't you read the badge? Reynolds' face flushed. I thought it might be fake. Danielle felt the words land, heavy and sharp. Based on what? She asked. Reynolds hesitated. The truth pressed to the back of his throat, unwelcome and obvious. I've seen people try to get into restricted areas before. That's not an answer, Danielle said. That's avoidance. Lewis raised his hands. Let's not turn this into. This is already what it is. Danielle interrupted. A demonstration of power exercise without reflection. She stood. The movement was small, but it shifted the room. Chairs creaked. Eyes followed. I want to be very clear, she said. This board exists to examine patterns, not intentions, not feelings, patterns. She gestured lightly toward Reynolds. Officer Reynolds, you did not wake up today intending to harass the chair of this board, but you did wake up prepared to question the presence of a black woman behind a desk. Reynolds' voice cracked. That's not fair. Danielle met his gaze fully now. Fairness is not measured by comfort. The camera's red light blinked steadily. Lewis cleared his throat. What are you requesting, Chair Carter? Danielle didn't hesitate. A formal incident report, body cam review, supervisor statements, and a temporary reassignment pending investigation. Reynolds stiffened. You can't do that over one interaction. Marcus replied. We can, And we should... Lewis hesitated. This could have union implications. Danielle nodded. So does everything that matters. She sat back down. We will not proceed with today's agenda until this incident is formally entered into record. A long pause followed. Then Eleanor spoke. So ordered. Reynolds looked at Lewis, panic creeping into his eyes. Captain? Lewis exhaled. Will comply. The word sounded like defeat. As staff began documenting, Danielle felt a delayed tremor move through her hands. She pressed her palms flat against the table until it passed. This was the moment people thought would feel like victory. The reveal, the power shift. Instead, it felt like gravity. Because even now, even with the title, the seat, the microphone, she could still feel the echo of the lobby, the way her presence had been negotiable until it wasn't. The meeting continued, but something fundamental had already changed, and it would not be put back where it was. By noon, the building felt different. The air carried a low hum of urgency. Phones ringing too often, doors closing too carefully. Danielle could sense it in the way people spoke around her, voices clipped and polite, like they were walking across ice they hadn't known was thin until it cracked. She sat in her temporary office, a glass-walled corner space that still smelled faintly of fresh paint. Her name hadn't been added to the door yet. Someone would do it later, after approvals and branding guidelines and the quiet choreography of institutional comfort. Her phone buzzed again. Chair Carter, said Linda Morales, the city's communications director. Before Danielle could say hello, we need to get ahead of this. Danielle leaned back in her chair. Get ahead of what? Linda paused, choosing her words. The narrative. There's no narrative, Danielle replied. There's an incident. Yes, but how it's framed matters. Danielle closed her eyes briefly. It always does. Across the desk, Marcus sat with his tablet open, scrolling through internal emails already leaking past their intended boundaries. They're calling it a misunderstanding, he said quietly. That word is everywhere. Danielle opened her eyes. Of course it is. Linda continued. We're drafting a statement. Something brief, expressing regret, emphasizing cooperation. Does it name harm? Danielle asked. Another pause. It doesn't need to be inflammatory. Danielle's voice sharpened. Naming harm is not inflammatory. Linda sighed. Danielle, you're new in this role. There are relationships to consider. There are people to consider, Danielle said. Relationships don't bruise. People do. The line went quiet. Marcus glanced up. We're already trending locally. Danielle laughed once, humorless. That was fast. Body cam chatter, he said. Unconfirmed, but someone mentioned footage. Danielle's stomach tightened. Of course they did. A knock sounded at the door. Eleanor stepped in, closing it behind her. Captain Lewis is downstairs. Danielle didn't look surprised. With lawyers. Plural. Eleanor confirmed. Danielle stood. Let's not keep them waiting. The conference room downstairs was smaller, darker. Legal chose rooms like this, contained, insulated, away from windows. Captain Lewis sat stiff back beside two attorneys in navy suits. Reynolds wasn't there. Chair Carter. Lewis said, standing quickly, thank you for meeting with us. Danielle remained standing. This won't take long. One of the attorneys smiled tightly. We're here to ensure due process. And I'm here to ensure accountability, Danielle replied. Those are not opposites. Lewis cleared his throat. Officer Reynolds has been placed on administrative desk duty, pending review. That's a start, Danielle said. We'd like to resolve this internally, the attorney added, without escalation. Danielle tilted her head. What does escalation look like to you? Media, litigation, public hearings. And what does resolution look like? Lewis spoke carefully. Training, counseling, a formal apology. Danielle folded her arms. That addresses optics, not systems. The attorney's smile thinned. With respect, Chair Carter, this is one officer. Danielle leaned forward. With respect, That's never been true. Silence. You know why this board was created, she continued. Because one officer became five. Five became a pattern. Patterns became graves. Lewis flinched. I'm not interested in punishment for punishment's sake, Danielle said. I'm interested in exposure. The attorney frowned. Exposure creates liability. Good, Danielle said. Then perhaps it will create change. They exchanged glances. Lewis said quietly, You're putting us in a difficult position. Danielle met his eyes. I was in a difficult position this morning. I didn't get to opt out. Another knock interrupted them. A staffer peeked in. Chair Carter? Channel 8 is asking for comment. The attorney exhaled sharply. Already? Danielle turned toward the door. Tell him I'll speak at the end of the day. After the report is filed. Lewis stood. Danielle. She raised a hand. Captain, understand this. Silence has never protected this department. It has only protected behavior. Upstairs, back in her office, Danielle finally sat alone. Her hand shook now, not violently, but enough to notice. She pressed them together, grounding herself. On her phone, a text from her sister blinked into view. Saw the news. Are you okay? Danielle stared at it longer than she meant to. Was she okay? She thought of the lobby, the desk, the finger pushing her badge away. She typed back. I'm standing. Outside her glass walls, the institution moved, adjusting itself, doing what it always did when challenged. Damage control. But for the first time, Danielle wasn't interested in control. She was interested in truth. The file was thicker than Danielle expected. She set it on the table in the records room, the manila folder sagging under its own weight. Dates, names, case numbers, an archive of moments that had once been called isolated, exceptional, unfortunate. Start with the last 5 years, said Renee Walker, the board senior investigator, sliding into the chair across from her. Then work backward if you have the stomach. Danielle opened the folder. The first complaint was brief. A black man stopped outside a courthouse. No citation, no arrest, just a warning and a note. Subject appeared agitated. The second was longer. A Latina city contractor detained for verification. That lasted 40 minutes. The third included audio transcripts. Danielle read aloud. Officer raised his voice when I asked why I was being questioned. Renee nodded. That's his language pattern. Escalation framed as response. Danielle flipped another page. This one was dismissed. Most were, Renee said, until you line them up. They worked in silence for a moment, the kind that grows heavy with recognition. Marcus entered quietly, carrying coffee. Union rep is already making calls, he said. They're saying this is a witch hunt. Danielle didn't look up. Every time accountability shows up, someone cries persecution. Renee leaned back. You should see the internal notes. She slid a tablet across the table. On screen, highlighted text glowed. Officer demonstrates strong command presence. May need guidance on discretion. Danielle felt her jaw tighten. Command presence, she repeated. That's what we call intimidation when it wears a uniform. Renee tapped the screen. Notice what's missing. Danielle scanned again. Race. Always, Renee said. Never named. Always implied. A knock echoed at the far end of the room. A woman stepped in, mid-30s, nervous, clutching a notebook to her chest. This is Angela Brooks, Renee said gently. She asked to speak off record. Angela swallowed. I'm internal affairs. Or I was... Danielle looked up. Was... Angela's voice trembled. I transferred last month. Why? Marcus asked. Angela hesitated. Because every time I flagged a pattern, I was told I was reading too much into it. Danielle gestured to the chair beside her. Sit. Angela sat, hands twisting together. Officer Reynolds wasn't the worst. He was just consistent. Consistent how? Danielle asked. Angela's eyes flicked to the door. Same neighborhoods, same tone, same assumption that compliance was owed, not earned. And when you documented it? Danielle pressed. I was told to consider context, Angela said bitterly. Stress, long shifts, public hostility. Danielle nodded slowly. Always the same excuses. Angela looked at her then, really looked. When I heard it was you, he stopped. I knew this wouldn't disappear. Danielle held her gaze. It doesn't take a chair to make something real. It takes a record. Angela exhaled shakily. I can testify, if it comes to that. Renee smiled slightly. It will. Hours passed. The folder grew heavier with each page turned, not because of volume, but because of gravity. Danielle felt it in her shoulders, her neck, the way her breath shortened without her noticing. At one point, she pushed the papers away. How many people never filed anything at all? Renee answered softly. Most. The room fell quiet again. Later that afternoon, they convened a closed session. No cameras, no press, just a board and the truth laid bare. Danielle stood at the head of the table. What we're seeing is not an anomaly, she said. It's a pattern of discretionary power exercised along predictable lines. Eleanor nodded. And protected. By language, Marcus added. By procedure. Danielle continued. This board cannot claim integrity if we treat today as an exception. A member at the far end hesitated. You're asking us to widen the scope. Yes, Danielle said, and narrow the excuses. A vote was taken. Unanimous. The scope expanded. That evening, Danielle returned to her office alone. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the city outside her window. She watched traffic crawl, each car carrying someone else's version of the day. Her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. She let go to voicemail. She pressed her palms against the glass, grounding herself. The desk, the badge, the finger pushing it away. That moment had cracked something open, not just for her, but for the institution that had counted on her silence. Now the pattern had a name, and it was being watched. The backlash didn't arrive all at once. It crept in through side doors and polite emails, through concerned phone calls and carefully worded headlines that asked questions instead of naming facts. Danielle recognized the rhythm. She'd heard it before in courtrooms and conference rooms where justice was always just one compromise away. The first call came from the mayor's office. Danielle, said Chief of Staff Robert Kane, his voice warm with practiced familiarity. We're getting some feedback. From whom? She asked. Stakeholders. She closed her eyes. Be specific. Kane side. Police leadership. Union representatives. A few council members. And what are they concerned about? Danielle asked. That this is becoming personal. Danielle laughed softly. It became personal when I was told I didn't belong in my own building. That's not what I mean, Kane said quickly. They're worried about morale. Whose? Danielle asked. Another pause. Later that morning, the union statement dropped. It was brief, defensive, and framed as protection. We support accountability, it read, but caution against politicizing isolated incidents and undermining the dedicated men and women who serve the city. Marcus read it aloud in her office. Isolated incident. There it is again. Danielle leaned back. They never isolate harm. Only responsibility. By noon, the op-eds followed. Is oversight overreach? When accountability becomes agenda. One officer's mistake shouldn't define a department. Danielle scrolled past them, jaw tight. They're not subtle, Eleanor said, standing near the window. They're questioning your neutrality. Danielle looked up. Because I was affected. Yes, Eleanor said. And because you're effective. That afternoon, Danielle testified before the Public Safety Subcommittee. The room was packed. Press in the back, union members lining the walls, arms crossed, faces set. Councilman Frank DeLuca leaned into his microphone. Chair Carter, do you believe you can fairly oversee an investigation involving an officer who wronged you personally? Danielle met his gaze. Do you believe a surgeon can operate after being cut? A murmur rippled through the room. DeLuca frowned. That's not the same thing. It is, Danielle said evenly, Competence doesn't evaporate because harm occurred. If anything, it clarifies responsibility. Another council member jumped in. Some are saying this has become a crusade. Danielle nodded. Accountability always looks like a crusade to those unaccustomed to it. A union representative stood. You're painting officers as villains. Danielle turned toward him. I'm painting systems as accountable. He scoffed. You're destroying trust. She stepped closer to the microphone. Trust isn't destroyed by scrutiny. It's destroyed by silence. Applause broke out in the back of the room. The chair banged the gavel. That night, Danielle walked her car under a sky heavy with clouds. A man called out from across the street. You should be careful, he said. People don't like what you're doing. She stopped, heart racing. Is that a threat? He shrugged. Just advice. She got into her car and locked the doors, hands shaking on the wheel. At home, she sat in the dark, phone buzzing with messages she wasn't ready to read. Her sister called again. You're scaring, Mom, her sister said gently. Danielle swallowed. I'm doing my job. I know, her sister replied. Just remember you're human. Danielle hung up and stared at the wall. The next morning, a package waited on her desk. No return address. Inside, a newspaper clipping of the lobby incident. Her face circled in red ink. Beneath it, a note. Know your place. Her breath caught. Marcus found her standing frozen. Danielle? She handed him the note. He read it, anger flashing. We're filing a report. Yes, she said quietly. And we're continuing. He studied her. You don't have to carry this alone. She met his eyes. I know, but I won't put it down. Outside her office, the institution shifted again, bracing itself, pushing back against the pressure she applied. They wanted her tired, isolated, afraid. Danielle straightened her shoulders. They would have to do better than that. The footage went live at 9:07 a.m. Danielle was already in the building when Marcus rushed into her office, tablet in hand, breath quick. It's out. She didn't ask what it was. She already knew. On the screen, the lobby appeared from a chest-mounted angle. Steady at first, then subtly invasive as the officer closed distance. The sound was clear. Too clear. The sigh, the laugh, the pause before the word difficult. Danielle watched without blinking. When the badge slid forward in the frame, when the finger pushed it back, something inside her tightened, not shock, but recognition. The camera caught what institutions rarely did. Sequence. Cause and effect. Power moving before permission. By 10 o'clock, every outlet had it. Body cam shows chair harassed at desk security footage undercuts. Misunderstanding, claim pattern or problem. Oversight board presses forward. Her phone lit up with messages she didn't read. She moved through the day with a strange calm, as if the world had finally caught up to something she'd known for years. At the emergency press conference, cameras crowded the podium. Microphones bristled like a challenge. Danielle stepped forward. This footage matters, she said, voice steady. Not because of who I am, but because of what it shows. The sequence, the assumptions, the escalation without inquiry. A reporter called out, Captain Lewis says context was missing. Danielle nodded. Context is precisely what this provides. Another voice. Do you believe this proves systemic racism? I believe it proves a system comfortable enough to act without reflection, she replied. That comfort is not accidental. Behind the scenes, the department scrambled. Internal memos leaked. Emails advising restraint. Reminders to stay on message. A draft statement that never named the woman at the desk. Renee brought Danielle a fresh packet. We cross-referenced the timestamps. There are discrepancies. Where? Danielle asked. Reynolds' report says the interaction lasted under 2 minutes, Renee said. Footage shows nearly 6. Danielle exhaled. 6 minutes is a lifetime when you're being told you don't belong. By afternoon, the union pivoted. Their new statement was softer, hedged with concern. We support a full review. It was a first crack. Angela Brooks testified the next day, voice trembling but clear. She named patterns, cited cases, described meetings where warnings were buried under procedure. When asked why she stayed silent for so long, she answered simply, because silence was safer. The room held its breath. Then came the suspension. Officer Reynolds was placed on unpaid leave pending formal charges for conduct unbecoming and falsification of reports. Captain Lewis announced it himself, jaw tight, eyes tired. Danielle watched from her office, the announcement playing muted on a screen. She didn't feel triumph. She felt weight lifting, just enough to breathe, but exposure cut both ways. That night, her address appeared online. Marcus called immediately. "We got security en route." "I'm fine," she said, though her heart hammered. "You shouldn't have to be," he replied. At home, lights on in every room. Danielle sat at her kitchen table and finally allowed herself to shake. The mug in her hand rattled against the wood. She set it down, pressed her palms flat, counted breaths. She thought of the people in those files. The ones who never saw footage, never got apologies, never sat at microphones. The next morning, the board convened again. Danielle stood before them. "Exposure is not the end," she said. "It's the beginning of repair." Eleanor nodded. "We're drafting reform measures." "Good," Danielle said. "And we're naming the harm in them." Outside, protesters gathered, some in support, some furious. Signs rose and fell. Chants overlapped. A reporter shouted, "Do you feel vindicated?" Danielle paused. "Vindication suggests something personal has been resolved. What I feel is responsibility." As she walked back inside, cameras trailing, she caught a reflection in the glass. Tired, steady, changed. The system had been forced to look at itself. It didn't like what it saw, and it was far from done reacting. The city exhaled, and the sound of it carried into Danielle's bones. It happened after the headlines cooled, after the urgent emails slowed to a trickle, after the protests thinned to clusters of signs leaning against metal barricades. That was when the cost arrived. Quiet, patient, impossible to reroute. Danielle woke, before dawn most mornings now. Not from nightmares exactly, but from a sense of readiness that had nowhere to go. Her body stayed alert even when the world slept. She lay still, counting breaths, listening to the hum of the refrigerator down the hall, the distant rush of traffic that never truly stopped. At work, people were careful around her, too careful. Conversations paused when she entered a room. Compliments came wrapped in concern. "You're handling this so well," they said, which always sounded like a warning, as if breaking would be a failure of leadership. Marcus noticed first. "You don't eat during meetings anymore." "I eat later," she replied. "When?" She didn't answer. The reforms moved forward. Body cam policy revisions, new escalation thresholds, independent review timelines with teeth instead of suggestions. On paper, it looked like progress. Danielle argued for every clause, every line that might otherwise soften under pressure. But progress didn't give back sleep. One afternoon, her sister came to the office unannounced. Danielle found her standing in the doorway, eyes searching. "You look thin," her sister said gently. Danielle smiled. Occupational hazard. They went for a walk instead of lunch. The air was crisp, the sky pale. For a moment, they could have been anyone. "I'm proud of you," her sister said. Danielle stopped walking. "That's not the same as being okay." Her sister nodded. "No, it's not." That night, Danielle attended a small community forum. No cameras, no press. Just folding chairs and tired faces. A man stood up near the back. "They suspended him," he said, "but they didn't erase what he did." "No," Danielle agreed. "They didn't." A woman raised her hand. "Do you ever wish you just let it go?" Danielle considered the question. The desk, the badge, the finger. "No," she said, "but I wish it hadn't cost so much." Afterward, she sat alone in her car, hands on the steering wheel, staring through the windshield. She felt emptied out, scraped thin by weeks of vigilance. Her phone buzzed. A message from Angela. "They asked me to come back." I said yes. Danielle smiled despite herself. "Good," she typed. "They'll need you." At home, she opened the drawer where she'd tossed a red circle newspaper clipping weeks ago. She stared at it for a long moment, then tore it cleanly down the middle, not ceremonially, just enough to break its authority. She poured herself a glass of water and stood at the sink, letting the quiet exist without filling it. The next day, the formal announcement came. Officer Reynolds would be terminated. Charges would proceed. The department issued a statement acknowledging systemic failures. The word sat there, heavy and overdue. Reporters asked Danielle how she felt. Relieved, she said truthfully, and tired. Do you feel justice was served? Danielle paused. Justice is not a feeling. It's a practice. When the room emptied, Eleanor lingered. You changed things, she said. Danielle looked at the table where her hands had once trembled. I paid for it. Eleanor nodded. Yes. That evening, Danielle walked home instead of driving. The city moved around her. Buses hissing, doors slamming, laughter spilling from open windows. Life continuing, indifferent and relentless. She felt the ache in her shoulders, the weight behind her eyes. She also felt something else. Not triumph, not closure, endurance. She stopped at a crosswalk and waited for the light to change. When it did, she stepped forward, not healed, not finished, but still standing. The vote passed at 4:18 p.m. No cheers, no applause, just a soft shuffle of papers and the sound of a pen clicking shut. The Municipal Accountability Board adopted the reforms with a unanimity that felt less like celebration and more like acknowledgement, an admission that what had existed before could no longer stand unexamined. Danielle watched the room, absorbed the moment. Eleanor closed her binder. Marcus leaned back, eyes tired but bright. Staffers exchanged glances that carried both relief and apprehension. Change always arrived with instructions no one had practiced yet. Thank you, Danielle said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. This board will publish implementation timelines within 30 days. Oversight does not end with policy. Outside, the city waited. At the press briefing, the questions were predictable. Do you consider this a victory? Danielle looked at the reporter. Victories are loud. This is quieter than that. Do you forgive Officer Reynolds? Danielle paused. Forgiveness is personal. Accountability is public. Will this deter future misconduct? It will, she said, if it's enforced. Later, alone in her office, Danielle packed the last of the temporary boxes. Her name was finally on the door now, etched cleanly, centered. She touched the letters with 2 fingers, not for reassurance but for record. A knock sounded. Angela Brooks stepped in, a badge clipped to her belt again. First day back, she said, half smiling. Danielle smiled in return. Welcome. They're nervous, Angela added. The right kind. Danielle nodded. Good. Nerves mean attention. As Angela left, Danielle sat and allowed herself a moment she'd postponed for weeks. She closed her eyes and let the silence land. It wasn't empty. It was earned. Her phone buzzed with a message from her sister. Mom says dinner's on Sunday. No politics allowed. Danielle laughed softly. Deal, she typed back. On the walk home, the city felt unchanged and different all at once. The same buses, the same cracked sidewalks, the same vendors calling out their wares. But somewhere beneath it, a line had been drawn and named. At the crosswalk, a young woman recognized her. Excuse me, she said tentative. I just want to say thank you. For what? Danielle asked. For not letting it go. Danielle held her gaze. None of us should have to. At home, Danielle cooked something simple and ate it standing up, then sitting down, then slowly. She washed the dishes and left them to dry. She turned off the lights one by one and stood at the window, watching the city breathe. The lobby returned to her, not as an echo of fear, but as a reference point. The desk, the badge, the finger, not erased, contextualized, transformed into evidence, into policy, into record. She knew there would be more days like that one. More desks, more questions framed as procedure. Progress never moved in a straight line. But it moved. Danielle picked up a notebook and wrote a single sentence on the first page. Accountability is What remains when excuses are gone? She closed it and set it on the table by the door, where she could see it when she left and when she returned. Tomorrow, she would go back to work, not as a symbol, not as a headline, as a chair. And when the city tested its habits again, as it always would, there would be a record waiting, not loud, not perfect, but present. And that, she knew now, was how change stayed.